The worst horror movie I ever saw was fucking great.
Hello and welcome to This May Hurt a Bit. My name is James Strayer and this is
John C. Myers.
And we're a horror franchise podcast discussing each film in popular and not so popular franchises. And today we are wrapping up our Pet Sematary discussions over the last 2 months. 4 movies of varying degrees of quality and nostalgic value for myself. And, there was really no reason beyond just wanting to see that newest one that I suggested we do Pet Sematary, because I know we kind of toy with our format of what qualifies a franchise. I'm starting to get a little bit more lenient on that. Mm-hmm. At first, it was like 4 and above. That's interesting. This hit the 4 mark. Right. Pumpkinhead hit the 4 mark. Some of these other franchises, especially with an every other week release schedule, are going to take like over half a year to get through. So
yeah,
I look forward to that.
Saw took a long time.
That's true. That's true.
9 of those.
But anyway, 4 Pet Semataries. I don't know. I really enjoyed 3 of the 4 of them, or at least watching them. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to say I loved the remake from 2019. I mean, you can listen to what we thought about that, but I enjoyed like the process of sitting down and rewatching that one again. Not so much the 4th one, as you all heard, but it was fun to revisit at least the first 2 in a legitimate fashion.
This was the first one that we've done that isn't just like, here's a whole bunch and then maybe a remake. That this was just
good call. Yeah,
adaptation of a book. Weird sequel, remake of an adaptation of a book, prequel. It's a weird conglomeration of stuff.
Yeah, there's not really a through line except literally just the Pet Sematary.
Right.
That's pretty much the only glue or tendons to hold this corpse together.
And it's interesting in kind of like what's been done with it, or like the tweaks that were made for it. Were they always successful? I don't think so, but is the differing takes on this plot of land.
Mm-hmm. I think I know the answer to this, but your favorite take, was it the wackier number 2? Was it the self-serious remake? Was it the eerie first one? I consider that movie eerie, but which if you're talking about bringing back to life a kid or somebody in your family via a Pet Sematary, which do you think is the best tone for it? I guess is my question.
You could look at it a different ways in terms of like, well, how successful an adaptation that mm-hmm. was, but even then there's different ways to go for that. I think that the first one, particularly being written by Stephen King, is a good Reader's Digest version of the whole thing, in terms of you're not going to get the depths of emotions like that you can get in the book. But in terms of like delivering your plot beats and your scares and your basic elements, I think that's decent enough. Mm-hmm. But I do like the wild and woolly aspect of 2. I don't think 2 I think 2 is a worse movie, but I had more fun with 2. Mm-hmm. But definitely those first 2 more than the latter 2.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think I like the overall tone and approach to the first one a little bit more than you do, but mm-hmm. there's no question that the wackiness of number 2 is just so much fun. Yeah. But the first one does, and maybe it's nostalgia, maybe it's just like this true love of folk horror that I've been going through for the past like 5, 6, 7 years. But like there's something about the tone of that first one that still really works for me, as far as, well, just the imagery and the ideas and the grief element, even if that lead guy didn't quite sell it all the time.
It at least attempts to delve more into the actual emotion of the grief and the underpinnings of all of it, rather than just the concepts and plot beats.
Right.
That it does try to show you, it tries to establish these people as actual people and have relationships and stuff outside of it, rather than just everything moving the plot along.
Right.
And so I think it's definitely more successful in that way than the remake. Mm-hmm. And I think makes for a little bit more interesting of a movie.
Yeah. And this will come up later if I remember to bring it up later during the kill count stuff. But those first 2 movies being so much more personal and about the characters and the relationships of going through that trauma was just so much more pronounced than mm-hmm. the subsequent 2 films, which you're right. The latter 2 films are just so much more like horror movie trope delivery service than it is like tone and personality of character and sadness, something to like latch onto.
I mean, even for as Wild and Woolly is too, is again, like you're getting whiffs of stuff there. Like, even the relationship between Clancy Brown and his son, there's like something there. There's some kind of conflict there that just wasn't present in any of the other stuff that was in a way that was interesting.
In the prequel, the most recent one, Bloodlines, as we discussed, that personality between David Duchovny and Timmy would have been more interesting to live with in that capacity, which brings me to, holy crap, I watched, what was that called?
Death Dream.
Death Dream. That was fantastic.
It's such a good movie.
I know exactly why you kept bringing that up. Yeah. Each episode. Watch Death Dream.
Yeah, absolutely watch Death Dream. And particularly like for what they were trying to get at in the new one, or elements of what they're trying to get at, that where it just falls so short. Yeah. In terms of like this person coming back, having to go to war, and the resentment they feel, and then like being a victim of the patriarchy and that kind of stuff. It's the interplay between characters is so much more interesting than just being like, what if a guy was dead and mad at you?
Yeah, exactly. Like there were interesting elements in Death Dream about how the father, after a while, got kind of sick of his return to dead son of being just a layabout, It's just like, hey, I came back from the war and I'm fine. That idea. Yeah. The mother, of course, was more sympathetic, at least for most of the time. I don't know. Like I was so impressed by that movie, and it crosses another Bob Clark off the list.
Yeah. It's hard to go wrong with Bob Clark.
Yeah.
I'm learning.
Go for it. If you didn't listen before, he's the director of the classic Black Christmas and the more classic Christmas Story. Yep.
So you got a movie marathon.
Yeah, go watch Bob Clark movies. And Death Dream was very dark. It was there was a tone to that I absolutely love. It's from 1974. It's got a very kind of low budget, grainy quality to it. Now, again, this is like, we're not just saying like, why isn't these worse movies like this better movie? But like, I think that there's some tonality and some thematic elements that are unmistakable what could have been brought into the other Pet Sematary.
Right. Well, and I think it's also a matter of tone, is that, you talk about the new ones being just like horror trope delivery services, is that there's this sheen of quote unquote elevated horror, or like that this is all horror has to be like serious and dark and brooding, and definitely like having atmosphere and that kind of feeling of dread. Perfect. Love that stuff. But basing that on stuff is usually helpful. Right. It's not just having a soundtrack and dark photography. And I think when you have something like Death Dream, which is largely in daylight, it's like that. And again, you have it based on relationships between people, not just plot beats. And I think that's definitely where the latter two fail for me, is that they're just so empty. And I'd much rather, I believe we talked about in Bloodlines, that like part of what I liked about Pet Sematary 2 is that it just went nuts with it. Yeah. It's not a great movie, but it was like, look, if we're going to just sort of abandon this sort of the element of like really focusing on grief and stuff like that, let's do something wildly different. Yes. And I mean, particularly because it's Mary Lambert as well. It's Mary Lambert, like being able to, it felt like Mary Lambert flexing more in terms of being, I know she didn't write it as much as she wanted to, but like playing around with it. You're not tethered to this thing anymore. What can you do with that? And I feel like going back with as we talked about in Bloodlines, going back to the Judd Crandall story rather than like all the way back to the Ludlow story that feature in there was a mistake, because you're still tethered to it. And then as a result, you fuck a lot of stuff up and kind of lessen what you're trying to do. Right. And not to be a complete asshole, but by this point, it's been known the director, Lindsay Anderson Beer, was on the King Cast and admitted to never having heard of the It TV series, the It miniseries. And that is baffling to me. Right. Yeah. That was, oh my God. Did no one around her suggest watching that? Did it not even come up during filming? Like, and I never, ever want to be like a gatekeeper kind of person as far as horror goes. But like the It miniseries is massive.
Like,
yeah, I'm not making a judgment call on it other than that's wild.
Yeah.
Never heard of that. That's
I mean, on one hand, that's awesome that she gets to experience that for the first time.
Sure, absolutely.
Incredible. But like, I'm not saying that you have to be like an expert on Maximum Overdrive to make some Stephen King
regardless
movies.
of what the topic is, you have to be an expert on Maximum Overdrive.
But it's just like the Tim Curry Pennywise is just,
yeah,
it's just so out there in the zeitgeist. I don't know, but man, yeah, that was wild.
Yeah. Just that kind of blew my mind, but whatever.
Anyway, yeah. I mean, just jumping off of what you said about Lambert directing the first two, that just goes to show the versatility that she has and the talent that she has. Two tonally wildly different movies that she just expertly directed. I mean, that's just so cool. She can do that first dark and sad one and then the second crazy one. That's range.
And I think that speaks a little bit to the everything becoming content and all that, of just the way things are now, is that like you look at the stuff that's come before. And even, we talk about even just like Silent Night, Deadly Night is a great example of the last movies. They're like, I don't care. We just attach the name to it. Maybe tangentially about Christmas, but kind of do whatever. Mm-hmm. That even part 2 of Pet Sematary is like, well, okay, well, we have this property. Let's kind of see what we can do with it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be exactly like we had before. Whereas like you look at just the look and feel of the latter two, they're like, no. It's almost, like they went with a spreadsheet of like, this is the color look. It's got to have the same color look. It's got to have this. It's got to have this. Like this has to match. We have to brand this a certain way.
Right.
And how much less interesting that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Than when you can just sort of take a concept and run with it.
Very true. Yeah.
I mean, that could backfire as well, as we've seen with Wishmaster.
Yeah, that's true. Didn't have the guiding hand through Wishmaster that maybe we needed. Yeah.
Stephen King's adaptation of Wishmaster, The Prophecy Fulfilled.
Totally. This is an easy question, but what's your favorite rendition of Judd Crandall?
Oh, Fred Gwynne.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's just like, there's nothing like wrong with John Lithgow's thing other than just criminally underutilized. Mm-hmm. The other guy was a hunk. Don't get me wrong.
My goodness.
Jackson White, absolute hunk, is young Judd Crandall, but just hashtag not my Judd.
Right. I'd like to know his workout regimen, but that's basically about it from Jackson White. But yeah, hands down, Fred Gwynne. Even if he is kind of, I think you referred to him as dangerously inept or something like that in the first movie.
Stupid.
Yeah, there you go. Still love that guy. Still want to hang out on his front porch with him as much as possible.
Guess what? He's a human being.
Yeah.
Like that's, I think that, that his solution was to have one beer and pass out is beautiful compared to be like, well, turns out we're all part of some secret cabal.
Yeah.
That just made me so mad. I hated that aspect of that so much of that. And there might be a way to do it, but it just makes it so much less interesting to me.
Right.
That or less terrifying that this has been this thing that you've stumbled upon versus like, here's this secret cadre of people that have always been fighting this.
Right.
And I don't know, it just isn't that interesting to me.
Me going on a slight Twin Peaks tangent, that's one of the things I didn't like about The Return, the Blue Rose Task Force. It's just so you guys have always been looking at like supernatural type of stuff instead of just stumbling into what was the Black Lodge mythology and everything. Stay tuned if we ever talk about Twin Peaks.
But I also like the idea that that like it's called the task force. It's two guys. Yeah. It's just Albert likes him enough to just get involved.
Well, and Jeffries until he disappears.
Oh, I suppose that's Jeff. Yeah.
Right.
But I think that's like, without getting too much into it, I think having like we have to operate like no one believes us about this. We're operating on it rather than like it's this secret understood thing.
Yeah.
That we don't need to tell anyone about or do anything about.
Right.
Particularly in this case, like this was, versus like the Blue Rose Task Force. Here's a specific plot of land. We know it's evil. Mm-hmm. Then set fire to it. Like this is a solvable problem that if there was anything like any motion done to this is how we've been fighting it rather than like, well, we put up some sticks.
Right.
What else do you want us to do?
Salt the earth?
Rather than just be like a few people know about it. And so like, well, I'm not going to go there. No one else knows about it. So what's the problem?
Yeah.
It just raises some more questions than it answers.
Right. Sure. Easy one, but always worth talking about in a wrap up. Favorite kill of the series.
That's tough.
I know what mine is off the top. And
go for it.
It's, I don't know if this is a cop out or not, but the way that they finally killed Gage in this one or in the very, very first one. Now, I know that our kill count rules were all over the place on this one, and I totally admit that because we were trying not to do like off screen. We were trying not to do like zombie, like re-kills.
Right.
So I guess that killing Gage at the end of the first movie is zombie Gage. So this doesn't quite fit that, but who cares? So just the kid's performance, the way it was filmed, like the way he stumbles backwards and says no fair, like that got to me on a different level than it has before. So
it was this horror mixed with pathos, you know, like it's something that I've thought about very frequently. After
what, killing a child?
You killing a child. No, but just like that, in terms of like a thing that sticks with me and that kind of horror and sadness. Yeah. Take away from it. Cause like just how effective that scene was. I mean, Henry Thomas getting stabbed with a shotgun is stupid, so I'm always a fan of getting stabbed with shotguns.
Whoa, a favorite kill coming out of Bloodlines.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's my favorite, but I did enjoy that one. And then I don't know. I mean, the Clancy Brown killing the kid with the motorcycle and kind of being surprised by it was pretty fun.
That was my second favorite. Like, actually, that was my favorite until I thought of Gage. But
I think Gage is the most effective. But as far as just like silliest, I suppose I enjoy that one.
Yeah, especially because it's that first close up where he gets the blood sprayed on his face and he kind of realizes what he did. Yeah, like that adds more.
Hey, this is pretty cool.
Yeah, reminds me of like Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman. Sometimes she's like realizing what she's capable of, like and going at it again. So yeah, favorite kill probably is that one, and it's hard to go wrong there. Preferred child death swap. You know what I mean?
That classic category.
Yeah. Did you prefer Gage? Did you prefer Ellie?
In terms of concept, the idea of Ellie dying, and like that kid struggling with that, not just with the concept of death, but with the concept of I'm dead, is interesting, and they didn't play out very well. But I think the idea of losing a small child like Gage was very affecting, and having him come back like looking exactly the same, like added some very creepy elements to it.
Sure. Yeah. Like we talked about on the remake show, like I thought that there was a lot of great opportunity that they almost got to with her coming back, and there were some bits that I really enjoyed, but I think that if we're just grading on how effective both were, I think I would have to go with Gage. And so much of that is that kid's performance. It was so effective in that.
And I think in all cases of in both the remake and the original adaptation, that like there's a lot of setup and then everything kind of goes crazy in the last like 20 minutes. But I think the setup in the first one, in the Mary Lambert's version, is a lot more effective because these people are allowed to be characters and human beings. And so like that when the stuff happens, it's more affecting rather than just being an event that occurs. And like we talked about in the remake, that the treatment of the death in the trucks feel much more like an inevitability and just dealing with the concept of death, whereas this seems much more specific. Like, what if your kid died in this very specific truck accident and came back? It just feels more like a horror movie plot rather than sort of a meditation. Well, meditation might not be the right word, but like an examination of death and grief. Sure. So it just doesn't have that same weight. So
without getting too far into what we hated about Bloodlines, what about the lore evolving and changing did we like and dislike starting from the first one to the fourth one? Especially with prequels, because you really got to expand lore. And add. So, we've already touched on the Order of Protectors and all that horse shit. But,
and the fact that Judd forgets all of that somehow
exactly.
is really stupid. But like, I do like that they spend a little bit more time with the concept that the land itself is cursed and evil, that there's something going on, that there might be, some force behind it, but they don't do much with it in Bloodlines. They're like, no, it's just operating through this reanimated person, which doesn't, I don't really understand how that makes sense, but it just also lessens the emotional power of that death, because he's no longer that person. He's this avatar for this other thing. Sure. I didn't like that as much, but I like I said, going back to the 1600 stuff, like that element of it, that this has always been there, to me was a little bit more interesting, and I would rather if they'd explored that. I mean, they probably would have, fucked it up too, but it might have been more interesting.
Totally. I like that bit definitely the best out of the Bloodline stuff. There's also, of course, the Wendigo that kind of comes and goes. Wendigos most of the time. That kind of thing is tough because I think that that's a really interesting thing to think about as far as what we always say of like showing too much of the monster, making the monster more of a pulled back malevolent force that you can't quite put your finger on. And I don't know if I'm trying to have it both ways or not, or just like perpetually unsatisfied. But like in the first one, it's a little unsatisfying. In the second one, or in Bloodlines, or sorry, in the remake, it was a little bit more interesting, but like they didn't quite nail it.
They did. It's more atmospheric for sure.
I did like some of what they did in the remake with the Wendigo, which kind of surprised me. I guess because the Wendigo is not even in the first one, except the howling of the loon and that kind of stuff.
Well, and I think in the remake they do sort of, it's the Wendigo, maybe. Like this is what they say, but there's no way to know for sure. And they at least that like gives it more of an air of mystery. And I'd much rather than have you further explain it. Here is X, Y, and Z. This is what's causing it. Make it me personally, I like more of a vibes thing. So even in 2, when it's like not real clear what's happening, but it's this very sort of theatrical thing of Edward Norton, keep doing it.
Yeah.
Edward Furlong, like going to this clearly fake set of the scene and walking to his mom's grave where you're just feeling the evil vibes.
Sure.
I'd much rather have that than just a rote explanation of like, no, it's a monster.
Yeah.
That, grew out of the ground. I don't know, something, just make it more of a tactile feeling rather than a Wikipedia entry.
Sure.
I mean, like I like having a little bit of an explanation, or at least a hint of like I said, like with the Wendigo being mentioned that it could be this is what the local legends are. Rather than just like, it's ground and it brings up the dead. And here's an abyss monster, like from here's a tube head.
Right.
That's going to show up for some reason.
Right. Yeah. And they don't really, from my knowledge or from my memory of the movies, and then I can't remember if it's more direct in the book, but like what the relationship of the Wendigo is to the ground. Is it just the legend that like he's running around out there doing it? Is he tied to the ground? Then you get into the whole expansive, like Ludlow as a whole being kind of like Derry, of just being like an evil town, which that kind of works for me. I can buy that a small town is just full of like malevolent weirdos because the borders are as such.
Yeah. Did he come with the crop rot? Did he cause the crop rot? Like that's kind of an interesting thing. Again, like I think we mentioned it in that episode, but check out Eyes of Fire.
Yes.
Not a great movie, but a fun movie to watch, and a good like exploration of like the same kind of thing of these pilgrims encountering this strange land and these ancient magics.
Right. Where would you go next? Because this is a franchise. I'm sure they've already figured out like we got to keep cranking out Stephen King stuff for Paramount Plus. Where do you go? Do you go forwards? Do you go backwards?
I think the problem with like if you're staying in the remake-averse,
which I'm sure they are.
The part of the problem with that is they took the part from 2 of like, well, the dead just want to make more dead. And so then it just kind of becomes a malevolent zombie movie or something like the comic book Crossed or something, like where it's just now you're just fighting deadites.
Right.
And whatever, which I mean, Cam, you're saying like they do that in 2, but one thing I liked about 2 is that it still kind of called that into question, because it also seems like somewhat personal, because they talk about the Creed killing happening and like Creed digging up his son. But then it sort of seems like Rachel came back and then killed Louis Creed, and then that was the end of it, which is also an interesting thing, that it is personal, in that going back to what Judd says about like, it's yours now. Like this is your responsibility, that it does keep it kind of insular,
tied. And
so you can do another like, do you go back to the well of the same story, but kind of different of like, well, I buried something and it came back weird.
Yeah.
Or do you like escalate it to be like fighting the demon behind it, reforming I forget what you call them, the protectorate of the town or something like that.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. I don't know. I would go further back. I'd like to see the Ludlow story more. I mean, they already sort of did it as much as you're going to do it, but
sure.
Even just going back to like the 1800s or something, just even though it's again the same story, but kind of different. I'd much rather do that than go forward from the apocalyptic ending of the remake.
Yeah, if you go back to the history of Ludlow, even in the 1800s, so it could end up like Ravenous, but Ravenous is a great movie.
Sure.
So you can kind of take that angle. And Ravenous has a great tone to it. Like kind of funny, violent, bloody, all that kind of stuff. I mean, I think my heart lies in just kind of righting the ship and just taking it back to like almost a gothic personal tale. I don't know what off the top of my head that would be, but turning it into like another like run and gun, like shooting people and like running through tunnels and stuff, I don't really want to see. But I would be intrigued by like a full on like almost two-hander chamber piece or something, you know, like make it for $8 million and make it, you know, real creepy and small. I think could be interesting too.
I mean, even, you know, if you want to avoid the whole like dealing with grief aspect, focusing on that.
Sure. Yeah.
Tell me the point of view of the dead person.
Yeah.
I mean, not to get like too exactly like Dead Dream, but you know, spend some more time with that person. And they're like what they try to do with Ellie a little bit with that. What's happening to me?
There you go.
Like, hey, I'm changing into this other thing that I don't really know what's going on, but I also don't feel right being me. This something isn't right here. Like that. Those are some interesting things to explore. I think you could do that with. Right. But I think if they do more with, particularly like with Lindsay Beer or whatever, it's going to be more running through tunnels and you know, shoot. Always be sure to put one in the brain, even though they're not zombies. In the eye. Sorry. Yes. Got to be in the eye.
I guess if it goes through your eye, it probably goes through your brain, right? Does your brain come all the way down?
Yeah. I mean, your optic nerves are connected in there. I've seen, I'm an expert on anatomy because I've seen Blood Diner.
Oh, there you go. Well, is there any other ideas you want to touch on before we get to who won the kill count for the franchise?
Remake it again. Why not?
Right. Yeah. Go smaller.
Yeah.
Actually, like ring up Mary Lambert and say, hey, you want to do that LA story?
Yeah, I would love to see that.
Yeah. Go back and do a sequel to the legacy sequel to the first one, whatever they call it, where they cut out all the rest and they go back and make a sequel to the first one.
Well, and I even think she, on that Mick Garris podcast she was on, I think she mentioned like, she's like, I'd still do it. Yeah. And so do it. Let Mary Lambert take another crack at it.
Right. I'd love that.
I mean, she's done half of the movies for this so far.
Right. Exactly. All right. Well, I checked back to our prognostications, our guesses, predictions. There you go. For how many people would die in this franchise. Again, we didn't double up on the zombies. We didn't do the off-screen ones. It's a little wonky. Take that for what you will. This isn't as easy as like counting out Jason kills, you know?
Right. They let you know when he killed someone.
Right. So I guessed 42. John Myers guessed 25. And John was thinking, he said basically like hoping that the story would stay very personal all the way through and not expand out and get too violent and all that kind of stuff. So kill count for the series is 25. John Myers gets it right on the nose. Yes, exactly. So,
wow.
Right. So yes, obviously, clearly keeping it with the very personal, small stories, you got it at 25. Yeah. So, right.
You're not going to get, Pet Sematary, Pig in the City, where they're having a big wild adventure.
Right.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of glad at least they stayed with that in terms of, we at least haven't yet. I don't know if this is in your questions, but like, how far away from Baghead did it get?
Oh, sure.
For if you're just joining us, this is our rating based on the Friday the 13th series where Jason started as a guy with a bag on his head and ended up in space. How far away from Baghead did we get? I think part of the problem with this series is you didn't get a chance to. I think thematically, like you lost maybe what was inside Baghead.
Right.
But, it's always like it was still kind of the same story, the same. I mean, Judd is in the prequel. The furthest it got was part 2. And even then, that's not that far away. And which is bad since it's about a location and a specific thing.
Sure.
Yeah. I wouldn't mind seeing them get a little further away from Baghead, though.
Yeah, I can buy that. Yeah. And even the prequel is still in line with Baghead. Yeah. Except adding like the whole secret society stuff to it.
It's still just like, it's still the same characters, You could stretch out a little bit, I think. Or even, like we said, get Ellie involved in What's that like? What's the aftermath of Baghead?
Right, there you go. How do we pick up the pieces from how far we got away from Baghead? Sure.
Because that's a fascinating story. That you talk about like dealing with grief. Your whole family went away.
Yeah.
Well, how do you deal with that? That would be a fascinating story.
How does the town treat you afterwards?
Yeah.
Are you convinced that they're still in that pet cemetery? Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Is Pascal still talking big words at you?
Oh, that'd be funny. He's still tied to Ellie.
It's like helping her do geography.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that'll about wrap up the wrap up. Only 4 movies to really dive into. But so thanks for everyone for listening along with us on this one. It felt like kind of an outlier, but I think it's because of what you said at the top of just being like, there's like, with only 4 movies, there's like several different branches on this in a weird way.
It's 2 of the same movie and a couple of variations.
Yeah, exactly. But with our next franchise, The Omen, kind of hoping that we get a little crazy with this one. I've, we can cover all this on the next episode, but I've only seen the first one, so I'm looking forward to getting into like 5 or 6 of these. Yeah. They're classics.
Yeah. I'm curious where it's going to go. And I think having it, because they're a little bit earlier, I'm formulating this, as I sort of mentioned, this theory about things being a little freer to get weird.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if that's going to hold true with these. Cause I mean, I know what little I do know about Daniel becoming president or whatever sounds amazing.
That's exactly what I want.
I want to see how they do that.
Right.
Fast forward to me seeing Omen 3 and being like, what is this?
Yeah, exactly.
Bring back Pet Sematary Bloodline.
Exactly. All right, everyone. Well, have a good holiday. Make sure to celebrate Christmas by popping in the first Omen movie and learning about Satan. And like I said last week, I believe they're all on Hulu right now, which is great. So check out The Omen and stay with us through that series through the next couple of months. I know we've already lined up a few guests if you're just sick of hearing just me and John blabber on about these. So, yeah. And until The Omen, you can follow us at This May Hurt a Bit Pod on Instagram, Hurt a Bit Pod on YouTube. Email us at thismayhurtabitpod@gmail.com. And if you have any suggestions for other franchises you want us to cover in the new year, send them along. I'm always adding them to our big list that we look at every once in a while, see what we're going to tackle next.
Yeah, we don't necessarily have a grand plan.
We're just sort of like stumbling around, just knowing that we probably won't get to Nightmare on Elm Street right away. Kind of saving that one. But
don't want to do all the big things back to back to back.
Exactly. So you got to have some maniac cops in there and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
So,
you got to have a maniac cop.
You got to have a little bit more Zadar in your life. So, all right. Anyway, we'll see you next time for The Omen. Bye-bye.
Good night.
This has been a Caretaker Press production. It was produced by James Strayer and edited by John C. Myers. Logo by Ethan Kimberling and music by Michael Arthur Holloway, who you can find on Bandcamp. Follow us on Instagram at thismayhurtabitpod and email us at thismayhurtabitpod@gmail.com. Give us a 5-star review over on your favorite podcast app, and we'll see you next time.